Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, April 4th, 2024. An interesting one for you today, folks. But first, let's do the housekeeping. Remember, we do have a vid chat tomorrow. That will be at 2 p.m. We're starting the new format vid chats this week. That means our vid chats will be limited to approximately 3 hours. So please get your comments and questions in as early as possible from now on, because I will be taking the questions and comments in the order that they were submitted. This is a little extra work for me, but it does enable us to stick within the 3-hour time limit. Remember that next week we will be adding a new vid chat, so there'll be 3 vid chats per month, but each one will be a little shorter. The one next week will be on Thursday evening. So for those of you who've been unable to attend the vid chats because of the afternoon time, we're adding another vid chat in the evening for those of you who are at work or perhaps over in the Pacific Basin or what have you. So 10 o'clock deadline tonight still holds, but remember, we're going to be starting more or less on time tomorrow, and we have that 3-hour limit. All right. In looking around for what I wanted to do today's news and views on, there were a lot of options, needless to say. I wanted initially to talk about more information that had come to me about the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, more information about the Moscow terrorist attacks, the war in the Ukraine, the war in Gaza. There's a fascinating story out right now about the Israeli military using targeting information provided to it by artificial intelligence. However, I'm only seeing one kind of weird source for that, so I don't know. I wouldn't put it past the Israeli military to use something like that. But the story is a little dodgy for me, but nonetheless it's out there. There are a lot of stories out there. But my eye fell on this one. You know, it's becoming apparent that whether he is or isn't behind a lot of things, Mr. Putin is quickly replacing Lucifer for being the arch criminal, evil criminal, super genius mastermind that is behind all the world's woes, at least according to the whacked-out woke nuttery that constitutes the American propaganda lamestream media. I ran into this story, and I want to read several paragraphs from it and provide you a little reminder and a little analysis before we leap to conclusions. The headline says it all. Quote, Russia is behind Havana Syndrome, attacks on U.S. former lead Pentagon investigator says. This is datelined March 31st, just last Sunday, by Nora Gomez Torres. And let me read the opening and a few of the closing paragraphs of this article. Quote, the former head of the Pentagon's investigation into the mysterious health incidents known as Havana Syndrome told the CBS investigation show 60 Minutes that he believes Russia was behind them and was attacking U.S. officials abroad and at home. In partnership with The Insider, a Russian exile media outlet, and a German magazine Der Spiegel, 60 Minutes reported Sunday night on new evidence connecting a possible domestic incident of Havana Syndrome to Russia and identified a Russian military intelligence unit identified as 29155 as the possible culprit of some of the suspected attacks, the latest turn in a case that has confounded U.S. spy agencies. Havana Syndrome got its name from the city where U.S. and Canadian diplomats and intelligence officials first reported in 2016 experiencing strange noises and sensations of pressure, and later developed debilitating symptoms like vertigo, migraines, and hearing and cognitive problems. The incidents were later reported around the world, which led to suspicions that a foreign adversary, possibly Russia, was attacking U.S. diplomats and spies with some type of directed energy weapon. As the Herald previously reported, 60 Minutes also said that a 2014 incident in Frankfurt affecting American officials might be an earlier instance of Havana Syndrome. Though the U.S. intelligence officials initially suspected Russia's military intelligence, known by the initials GRU, U.S. intelligence agencies said in March that they hadn't found hard evidence pointing to those responsible, and that it was unlikely that a foreign adversary has been attacking American officers around the world. Let me read that last part again. And that it was unlikely that a foreign adversary has been attacking American officers around the world. But the incidents have not stopped. According to 60 Minutes, a previously unreported anonymous health incident, the government term for Havana Syndrome, at the NATO summit in Lithuania last year, attended by President Joe Biden, left a senior Pentagon official seeking medical care. Now, folks, I'm going to skip all the way to the bottom. Mark Zaid, a lawyer for a few dozen Havana Syndrome victims, told 60 Minutes that there is evidence of a government cover-up. Sources told the Herald that many of the officers injured were involved in work related to Russia or were stationed in places where Russian spies could work with ease, like Cuba, China, Vietnam, and most of Europe. Some officials in Hanoi, Bogota, London, and India happened ahead of, or some incidents, I should say, in Hanoi, Bogota, London, and India happened ahead of or during visits by senior U.S. officials. Cuba, a close Russian military partner, has denied it has any involvement in these incidents, and Cuban diplomats and scientists have insisted that injuries are psychosomatic, a case of mass hysteria, or can be explained by pre-existing conditions. After the Miami Herald reported on the cases of CIA agents receiving compensation for brain injuries linked to the Havana Syndrome cases, Cuba's Vice Foreign Affairs Minister wrote on X, quote, "Without any shame, pundits and main media outlets continue to recycle the fabulous legend of attacks against U.S. diplomats. No evidence has surfaced, the scientific community has discredited it, yet there is money to be made and political slander against Cuba to be pushed," unquote. Now, as you just heard, there's no evidence that it's Russia. Now, does Russia have the technology and know-how to pull off these types of remote, probably electromagnetically based brainwave attacks? Answer, yes. Anyone who's studied the literature knows this is the case. So you cannot rule Russia out. The trouble is, as the technology has proliferated, and the technology, I wrote about this technology in my book, Microcosm and Medium. The technology itself, folks, has been around for a very long time, easily about 50 years, and it has grown much more refined over the decades. The technology, in fact, if you read carefully what I read in that book, the technology, in fact, has created what I called in the book electroencephalographic dictionaries. Dictionaries of brainwave patterns of particular specific words. And when those brainwaves are modulated onto an electromagnetic signal, they can literally beamed into a brain and create an internal conversation or manipulate one's internal conversation. And usually the way of doing this is by electromagnetic interferometry. In other words, two or more such beams being interfered on a region in space, and it's the interferometry, it's the beat frequency resulting from that interference pattern that is actually what you need to achieve this type of effect. But the Russians have it, okay? But my point here is the technology is such that probably a lot of people have it, including non-state actors. And in fact, in my book, you'll discover that one of the major concerns has been that this technology has fallen into the hands of non-state actors. So could Russia be behind this? Well, obviously, yes. And it stands to reason that all of these attacks have occurred on American or Allied officials as they are probably in meetings discussing what to do about Russia. So I'm not ruling Russia out here. But I think that there is a factor that we're overlooking and that the Pentagon is overlooking. And as usual, it's probably being overlooked in our stupid rush to blame Putin, and Russia on everything. In this respect, Putin has almost, as I said at the beginning of this, has almost replaced Lucifer as the big super genius criminal clown guy that's orchestrating all the bad stuff in the world. I grew up remembering it used to be the Jews or the Freemasons or the Vatican or, whatever crazy conspiracy theory you wanted. So now it's Putin and Russia. I do not think that the case against Russia, particularly as the article points out that there's a complete lack of evidence. Well, what kind of evidence would you need? Russia has clearly stated through Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's National Security Council, that they have all sorts of options for horizontal escalation available to them. Now, this phenomenon began shortly after, in 2016, shortly after the Maidan coup in the Ukraine. So again, Russia becomes a principal suspect. But I suspect that now we are way beyond this kind of soft response. It seems fairly evident that since the Moscow terrorist attacks, that the West had at least some role in those, perhaps of only a permissory nature, in other words, giving permission to the Ukraine to go ahead and do it, or perhaps bankrolling, whatever. But that was a serious attack, and it would require, in my opinion, a much stiffer horizontal escalation response from Russia. I think, in other words, that the gloves are off, and therefore that while Russia may or may not have been behind the previous attacks, the current ones may be someone else mimicking those brainwave attacks. That's my suspicion of the moment. But now you'll notice something else. When these attacks initially occurred, the American government was quick to dismiss any technological role, and it was quick to dismiss any role of Russia or Cuba or anyone else for that matter. Now, within a space of a few short years, 8 years from the original attacks to now, 2024, the government has completely reversed its position and said now there is such a technology, basically, that is capable of doing this, and Russia owns it. Okay, so in other words, I want people to pay attention to what's just been admitted by this Pentagon spokesman. Mind manipulation technology is real. That's what has just been admitted. And if it's just been admitted, you can expect that our own technology and capability in this regard is probably more or less commensurate with the Russians. Would we be capable of staging false flag attacks on our own personnel? For whatever political reason, you betcha. So in the absence of evidence, we can't say really for any certainty who did this. I'm relatively certain, however, that even though Russia has the technology and may have been and probably was involved in some of these incidents in the past, that things have now escalated to the point that this would be a rather soft measure of response for the Russians to use. I therefore suspect that what we're looking at with recent incidents might actually be somebody else. So that's it for today's news and views story. This is an interesting story, one to pay attention to, because I suspect you're going to see this technology now be increasingly used as pressure by various countries that have access to it against other adversarial countries. You're in a mafia war. That's it for today's news and views. Don't forget to get your questions, comments in no later than 10 o'clock tonight. But remember, we're taking them in order, and however much time I spend on individual questions is however much time, and we have a 3-hour time limit. So remember, from now on, it behooves you, once the posts are posted, to get your comments and questions posted in the comments as early and quickly as you can. Remember to keep them as short and to the point as possible to allow as many people to get their questions and comments in as possible. We'll see you on the flip side, everybody. Bye-bye, and God bless.